Let's all try to put the pieces back together again.
Hello, this is Dan Nowman Niswander, and you are watching the Nowman Show. And I am here with Alan Minsky, who is the Executive Director of the Progressive Democrats of America. Alan, how you doing tonight?
Pretty good. I'm in an attic.
You're in an attic?
Yeah. Expanded out to every nook and cranny of this house here. So I'm up in an attic. And yeah, it's been very warm in Los Angeles. And it's a little warm in this room. But other than that, doing okay. Obviously, it's just a impossibly unique and impossible situation we're all living through. So.
Yeah, and I talk to people a lot and I ask them, how they're doing, and people ask me how I'm doing, and I've noticed already the good of. It seems like people are kinder and more caring than I've noticed. You know what I mean? Because we're all in the same boat together. And that's.
I think, yeah. I mean, we in Los Angeles, of course, we're driving less, and that's always a great thing. Traffic is a source of incredible anxiety. I agree with what you're saying, and I do think there's some promise for the prospects of a broader solidarity coming out of this experience. It is a pretty overlapping experience, even as we're isolated for most people. So we really can all relate to each other. I certainly have a tremendous amount of sympathy and solidarity for people who might be in apartments. I'm blessed to have a property here in Los Angeles that's a house with a yard. And so, yeah, tremendous amount of solidarity. But what are we looking at coming out of this in terms of, who holds institutional power in American society and global society? How poorly has this been managed by the various governments in the United States? Especially in terms of coming out of this and how society and the economy looks. Obviously, the public health response in the United States has already been massively inadequate.
Oh, that's an understatement, right? It's like, and all these trillions of dollars of stimulus money that were initially given to basically billionaires and mega billionaires, and then at the same time, the public health and safety infrastructure is just was extraordinarily poorly prepared. I mean, to not even have swabs and tests ready to go, and they still don't really have that, to my understanding. I mean, how inefficient can you be? How can my thing is with people is that how can you support this focus on the private for profit model with so much dysfunction and just incredibly inefficient? How can you say that is a model that we need to hold on to and reject Medicare for all? It just boggles my mind. It's mind-boggling.
Yeah, it is astonishing, and I think the public gets it. We're of course faced with quite a paradoxical situation in that as of right now, we have a Democratic presumptive nominee for president, Joe Biden, who does not support Medicare for all. Yeah. The latest Quality national poll showed that Medicare for all has 88% approval among Democratic voters.
Wow.
What political party? And that was the signature policy that was debated in this presidential cycle. What political party ends up with a nominee that doesn't support something that 88% of the party's base supports? And it's 69% approval among the general public. It was up to 46% among Republicans.
I know.
I mean, that's not a winning political issue. That is a landslide winning political issue. And so, progressives right now, it's a painful period for people who are supportive of Bernie Sanders' campaign, very painful, maybe compounded not only because of the tragedy of the circumstances in general, but by the fact that we recognize that the policy positions that Sanders advocated for are even more popular now than they were a couple months ago. And yet, we also have to be honest about Sanders didn't win. Why didn't Sanders win? What did Biden have that allowed him to win? Besides the rather unorthodox unification that occurred behind him as a candidate very rapidly after he seemed to be just losing in a rout in the very early primaries and caucuses. What it was is he promised the restoration of the Obama administration. And I think as much as on a policy front, Sanders remains or has become even more popular than Biden in the time after which Sanders fell behind and then lost a few more primaries and then eventually closed down his campaign. The fact of that Biden is the one candidate who could really signify and represent the restoration of the Obama administration, and that signified a scientific response, a professional managerial response to this kind of crisis, even to this hour, even with the new scandals that envelop Joe Biden personally in his campaign. It's not, within the Democratic Party primary structure going forward, it's not necessarily a losing hand. Okay, fast forward to November, Joe Biden is certainly not the person I was hoping, given his policy background, who would be the Democratic nominee and the person who, because of pragmatics, in all likelihood, I'll be wishing will win the presidential election come, say, October and the very beginning of November. So how do you assist that? And I think right now the struggle is very much the point of struggle, and the thing that Biden needs and the Democrats need are the progressive policy platform.
They do.
Really do what we can do in these next few months to force them to adopt as much of it as possible will be to their benefit. Mm-hmm. And if they actually then, this is a whole nother level of concern beyond just defeating Trump and winning the election. If they're able to implement it, of course, then that will also be to the tremendous benefit of American society and the American people.
Well, there's conjecture that, and even there was even conjecture to some extent. Of course, people have their varying views on this, but there was conjecture even in 2016, let alone, again, repeated in 2020, that technically the establishment Democrats that are in power, Pelosi, Schumer, et cetera, they actually, behind closed doors, they're okay with another 4 years of Trump. And because it just seems to me like I told people last time around, I said there's two things that it seems to me that the Democratic establishment, the Republican establishment, the Trump camp, and the Clinton camp were all in agreement with 100%. And the reason why I believe that or think that is because the outcome of what actually happened. So the first thing I think they were all in agreement in, Bernie Sanders as the nominee for the Democratic Party, no, not going to happen. Right. And the second one, we don't really like progressives and especially their agenda. So, okay, if a few kind of get in, we can maybe tolerate that, but actually we would prefer zero. and I think that's happened again with Bernie, in the sense that I don't think that they don't want to lose their power. So that's why they don't want progressive agenda. And yet they want to have this fairy tale, truly utopian mindset that somehow people are going to go vote for them because they're not Trump. And yet the issues, as you mentioned, like Medicare for All, most people are on board with that. I mean, even if you explain like what's going on with the stimulus packages right now, and you try to tie that in with job creation and the Green New Deal, you wouldn't have to use certain words, but people would actually favor that if they knew, what do you call a stimulus check? A UBI for 1 month or whatever, or half a month, or depending where you live. That's what that could be labeled. I mean, you don't have to use those labels, but technically that's free money because of circumstances beyond your control, which is really what even Yang's, freedom dividend is about. So I interviewed him, and that's what it's about. It wasn't intended to be something permanent, just a temporary kind of solution, to help people out. Just like, that was the original idea of the New Deal, I guess. But, it became so popular. We still have unemployment insurance and Social Security, obviously. But yeah, going forward is like, one of the things is, with Occupy, it was a movement, right? And for the first time since the 1930s, there was public discussion about what the core of the bigger picture problem actually is, which is the extreme income and wealth. I always tell people it's income and wealth inequality. And here we are again, and it's just getting worse and worse and worse.
Well, what I would want to do with what you've said, and there's much there, and so much of it is absolutely right on point. But I think the degree to which I think we understand the political trajectory of the mainstream Democrats and who they represent. And in a very fundamental way, they are currently conservatives.
That's right.
Trump obviously represents a shift in the ethno-nationalist, racist component, but also in his shenanigans around trade, and then, you know, the actual renegotiation of NAFTA 2.0. These were big issues for him as a candidate, but it's a racist vision that he puts forward. He wants to close off borders. Closing off borders would ostensibly produce higher wages, certainly over time, for the domestic working class, whatever their ethnic makeup may be. And that's his pact, much as it would have been for Marie Le Pen if she, or will be if she wins, or when she wins, if she ever wins. Let's hope she doesn't. You know, this kind of ethno-nationalist right-wing ideology. So Trump did represent a shift away from the neoliberal status quo, and the Democrats are conservatives in that they want to maintain the economic status quo of the last 4 decades. Now, there was a consensus when you had the macroeconomic policy when it ran from, you know, the Bushes through the Clintons. Now, you know, the Republicans would push in one direction a little bit more, but not that much more. I mean, the Obama administration was about to digest the shift in social security expenditures. Bush tried to use his political capital after winning, and then that didn't go anywhere after 2004. So neither were able to achieve that. I mean, the Republicans do run up budget deficits through tax cuts a little more aggressively than Democrats, but the difference is pretty slight. Now you get Trump, and you see a lot of that continue with Trump, but the little differences and their ugly differences that I mentioned before. So he's not conservative to the degree that the moderate wing of the Republican Party and the mainstream of the Democratic Party are. And then there's the progressives and their entry, unwelcome entry, into the electoral political realm en masse through the 2016 Bernie Sanders campaign, the election of a handful of really, you know, progressive superstars in the 2018 midterm elections. It doesn't look like any of the major progressives will lose office at the federal level. There'll be a few more who will add on. But then again, Sanders, for the second straight election cycle, took third place.
Yeah.
Where we sit right now. And I agree that Sanders, and to a degree Warren, but Sanders did better than Warren, so Sanders was the candidate at the end representing the progressives, clearly represented and to borrow a phrase from Warren, you know, or a paraphrase of it, you know, structurally significant change to the way things were operating in a very clear way that targeted the specific structures around how the economy is built, the neoliberal economy is built, to maximize the profits for the investment class. Mm-hmm. And so for the wealthy who are just, you know, rolling in all this dough, fitting with Thomas Piketty's critique in Capital, and Sanders challenged that, and the mainstream Democrats clearly were not going to allow him to do this, get close to it, because that's right now with Trump as the president, they're the people who are defending that status quo, as well as the sort of strict status quo of the foreign policy establishment as well. And of course, there's a lot to protect for the people who oversee the American imperium there from their point of view. So yeah, they weren't going to let Sanders win, but then COVID-19 hits.
Yep.
And you know, you gotta just, sometimes you gotta wonder, just to torture yourself, you know, why didn't that just hit right after Nevada? You know?
Yeah, I know.
We'd be in a very different world. But imagine that, because he would have won Nevada. He was in a position for about a week there as the presumptive, you know, at least guy was going to have a large plurality of delegates going into the convention. You know, would they all add up to try to block him? That was a scenario being played out. Then imagine if COVID-19 hits in the way that boosts his platform, we'd be in a different world. So our enemy, the coronavirus, was 3 weeks late from being our salvation politically. But yeah, one can only imagine the establishment still wouldn't let it fly. But it's a very, very, very sad reality when we now have a circumstance which requires the kind of fully muscular, beyond muscular. I mean, a steroid-ripped weightlifter type response to the kind of New Deal politics that are required when you have 33 unemployed people, 33 million unemployed people all of a sudden.
33 million as of today, May the or 8th.
It's staggering. And so how does a modern technological economy adjust to that? What are the resources we have? And the resources we have are through, governments with strong sovereign currencies, the capacity to do expenditure, and UBI, temporary or permanent, jobs programs, all of this, right? And building up social institutions, a social welfare state, providing universal health care. All of these come straight out of the Sanders playbook, and they would seem to be the necessary response, and we're not heading in that direction.
I know, and to me, that seems like a disastrous
it is,
reality that, especially when some of us have been studying these kinds of ideas for years. I know even in my own show, the Nowman Show, Jimmy Dore and I talked about, I brought that up with him in 2015. 2015. So, because I learned about it when I was still doing like a radio show, on an internet radio show, and I have family in Switzerland, and I know that they had a referendum that they were voting on there for universal basic income, just to temperature what the people felt about it, and it got 40% of the vote approval. So that's when I really first learned about it, and I thought, well, that's interesting. That's the first time I've heard anything like that since the New Deal. So to me, it's been an ongoing process, because and then there were people talking about it, I know, at Occupy, but somehow I guess I didn't meet those folks. But here we are, we're going forward. Like you were saying, I liked your analogy with the weightlifting. We really are at that point where we just gotta we have to address this, because I mean, there's people that are still, they're living in isolation, in quarantine, the social distancing, the face masks. I know myself, I've had a real interesting couple months, because on March the 8th, right before this all happened, I actually auditioned for America's Got Talent. The next week or so, here we are, what? We got to be confined to our houses? I'm like, it was just so surreal. It's like we're in Hollywood, living in a Hollywood movie kind of thing. So, and as you know, we've done a lot of work together in various capacities through KPFK, and then of course, as an activist, I realized I'm a movement guy, and I was more in that direction with Bernie than actually Bernie. I like Bernie and what his platform was, but I was more focused on the potential there, what could be done with his platform, and because of his following. That's how you build a movement, which is how you make change. And everybody's technically can be a leader in some way or another, but you do kind of need a person leading the leadership. And he seemed to be the only one in that kind of capacity. I first learned of Bernie at Occupy too. So there's so many different connections with that movement building that I began to realize as I was doing my TV show that we really do need to build coalitions. We really need to find ways to bring people together and figure out how we can take these agenda ideas, these issues, and really put them out there to the general public so that they are pliable, so people can understand them and they don't feel threatened by them, or they don't judge them by labels, because we all know that the mainstream media puts all kinds of labels on all these things. And there's ways to communicate it that even the average person can understand, and it doesn't matter whether they're right, left, or center, or whatever. That really is irrelevant at the end of the day, if you can appeal to the human element. And actually, we have a wonderful opportunity right now with this virus, keeping people in their homes. They have a lot more time to be contemplative and think about the world and how they've looked at it for all these years, and think about where we go from here. And it opens up a lot of possibilities. But at the same time, as far as organizing is concerned, this is kind of how we have to do it, the internet. or using a cell phone, which we can't really. We might have to find some ways for social distancing meetings in person or something, because it really does require organization, that can actually create something that sends a message and starts to put together, like we did at the Occupy camps, demands. I think I have a box of stuff from Occupy, and one of the forms I have in there is a list of demands, because we actually had a demands committee, and there wasn't just 3. There was there were numerous ones, maybe 50 even. And to get that out and take a look at it's a good research document, reference document.
Well, what's for sure is, coming out of this thing, again, the tragedy of not having the possibility of electing a politician who would really pursue. We knew before the COVID-19 crisis that Bernie Sanders wanted to pursue basically a Green New Deal, but a New Deal. And clearly that's what's called for in a response to a crisis like this that is so just ripped apart the national economy, to a certain extent the global economy. But obviously we know of other countries where it's been responded to better and more responsibly. You don't have this kind of mass unemployment. And we have a lot of wealth inequality and a lot of poverty in the United States of America. And the prospects of how exacerbated that's going to be is tremendous. And we're not even out of the woods on this crisis or even close to it in terms of the public health dimension.
I know.
And so, that's extremely dire. But, there are, of course, we have no sense of whether we're going to, especially without a progressive guiding hand, a new Roosevelt, as it were, in office after this presidential election cycle. We have no idea where this is going to go. And if Trump, for instance, is reelected with all of the chaos that he brings, where we're going to be and the kind of political scenario we're going to be is unknown. But certainly out of crisis, the cliche is, of course, there's opportunities, and the opportunity to remake the society coming out of this is significant on innumerable planes. But PDA, the organization I'm the executive director of nationally, we're pretty committed right now to a strategy that I know, first of all, I'm a big Jimmy Dore fan. And I absolutely think that he is an incredible asset for progressives in this country. And I know that he's often the first sort of left progressive, left radical media celebrity who's brought up these days as being opposed to, working inside the Democratic Party right now, or seeing that as just a dead end. And, I do differ. I do think, and I don't want to be sheepdogging anybody in the Democratic Party. I think we have to look exactly where you were going earlier, though, again, the degree to which some of it is speculative, we have to acknowledge. Okay, were we in a position where we were able to say, Democratic Party, you now have a majority in both houses, you have a Democratic president, this needs to happen because nothing else works, and what needs to happen is a New Deal. Would they go for it? Now, the better scenario is you have a President Sanders, who we know from the White House, obviously the most influential player in that process, would pursue it. You have Joe Biden. Right now, for purposes of trying to keep as many people alive, and also because there simply is no other avenue to get anything progressive, unless you can drop progressive positive, out of these very powerful institutions that we're going to rely on, particularly the United States federal government. Because we even see today, I think today, maybe it was late yesterday, the announcement that California, the largest state and the most prosperous state, one of the, if it's considered separately, one of the largest economies in the world,
Number 5
is going to fly from a $6 billion surplus to already, and we're really just beginning this process, already a $12 billion deficit. Now, of course, you can produce state bonds and you can try to cover it up that way. You can run because you have a good credit line on a significant deficit, but they are not a federal government. They do not control the currency. They can't generate funds. They don't even have a public bank set up or public banking structure for the regions of the state yet. And though that's something hopefully it'll come more into play too. But you can see the difference between even the California government, and by the way, the relatively solid and responsible approach to the crisis that's come out of Gavin Newsom's office versus Trump or many other governors from around the country. And yet there's going to be no capacity to do what the federal government can do. That's why the New Deal came out of the Roosevelt administration. The logic of MMT plays strong here. We have sort of a theoretical backing to play around with, who could guide current administration towards the kind of fiscal spending and positive progressive fiscal spending. But any of it, getting any of it at all, pretty much requires having influence inside the Democratic Party and having Democrats win office. Because we're not going to get anything out of the contemporary Republican Party, or if we get anything, it would be in the variation I talked about earlier from Trump, in a highly ethno-nationalist way, a breaking apart of the United States from the sort of structures of the global economy. That would create all sorts of supply chain crises right now if he were to pursue that. And that leaves us vulnerable as he tries to sort of saber rattle on that front. So it's not, responsible governing. And if he were to take it in the, full regalia direction of where his logic goes, it's more of it is a fascist type of national economic planned direction. On top of that, by the way, a Trump victory in 2020 would also signify to the Bolsonaros of the world, the Dutertes, the Modis, the Putins, that, whatever we make of constitutional Republican democracy, liberal democracy, whatever you want to call it, it's a hell of a lot better than fascism. Mm-hmm. And that's the sort of loose-knit, Steve Bannon-esque movement around the world will be so bolstered by a Trump victory. So for us right now, what PDA is doing, as you know, we're involved in a new initiative to try to win as many progressive delegates as possible to the DNC. I welcome my friend Jimmy and everybody else who wants to be critical of it to be critical, but we're going to be advocates for it because we think it's what needs to be done just to do what we can do to do the best by our society from the positions of responsibility that we have as, major players inside national progressive organizations. So we're very proud to be partnering with the organizations we're partnering with. And, we're gonna be pursuing this to win delegates. We don't know how the Biden controversies will shake out. If they do somehow create a dynamic whereby he can't remain as the nominee, then hell yeah, we're gonna be asking Bernie Sanders to unsuspend. So, that's not out of our hearts yet.
Yeah, I know the reason why we had a New Deal was because there was that kind of pressure put on the White House. It wasn't Democrats and Republicans sitting around like, well, should we help the people or not? No, it wasn't anything like that at all. I learned from Richard Wolff that, there were clearly the same kinds of similar circumstances then as there are now, where there were conservative Democrats that had no interest in that whatsoever. So it did require some outside pressure, just like, building a movement from the bottom up. It did require that in order for us to get the New Deal. I mean, it didn't happen because the establishment just suddenly felt compassion in their hearts. And that's not going to happen this time either. So, there really has to be, the kind of thing that Bernie Sanders talked about, a political revolution using issues and people to, put pressure on the establishment to say, look, if you want our support, you're going to have to do this. This is not a maybe, and that kind of pressure, and I know that scares some people, but I'm going to actually even surpass your cynicism here. Your cynicism is well-founded, in other words.
We have to think holistically about those challenges. So the degradation of the planet, that should concern all of us. War and the United States unbearable imperialism, that's a problem. Trade laws that don't allow for workers' rights, human rights, environmental quality principles. We need to change that. There are the fact that so many young people can't get a decent education. All of these things should concern us.